Lunceford, you are very welcome to the podcast. Thanks a million for taking the time to join me.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. I look forward to our discussion.
Absolutely. I have a feeling we're going to learn a lot from you, Greg, myself and our beloved listeners here in
Well, I'm
Ireland.
always happy to make a contribution, not only to your podcast, but to our industry and also to global society. So,
Awesome. I love the sound of that. And I love the sound of your book, Exit from Work. It's a it's a catchy title.
yeah, so exit from work is something that I came up with. I practice wealth management and financial planning also. And how it started was it's 2008, and I'm working for a large international bank in the wealth
Mm,
management division. We have this global crisis in real estate,
sure.
and people are starting to lose jobs and things like that.
Mm,
And we had a few people walk through our doors that were offered exit packages from their jobs,
sure.
and so um, I was very curious because you would think that would be a very quick sales cycle because the packages were very generous and very
Mm,
lucrative in a lot of cases, and the sales cycle was longer than a typical sales cycle. And
okay.
so when I came into the industry, when I came in the financial services, I was told that exiting from work, and you can see it play out in some of the commercials you saw on TV, at least here in the States, was an economic decision that people worked until they could afford not to work. And
Mm,
so what I was seeing were people who were getting these very generous packages that would not have to work ever again. Not
sure.
only that, some of them were so generous that generations of their families would not have to work again. And they were having a hard time exiting and
Wow.
making this decision. And at first, I thought it was like maybe because there were just massive layoffs and so much financial uncertainty. We were on global crisis from an economic standpoint. Then I realized it really wasn't that. And I went to my employer at the time and I said, "There's a problem with our clients and
Okay.
prospects where there's something that is preventing them from making this thing that we've been told is economic choice." And what they came back to me and they said was, it's probably we're competing against other competitors, and it's
They're
not the
shopping
choice that,
around.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
shopping around. So
Yeah.
they're not having a hard time deciding to leave, but they're having a hard time picking the provider. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's it. So they said, discount it. So we would go in and say, hey, if you sign up with us, we'll offer you this deep discount or whatever. Or we want you as a client or whatever. It's still good business. And the sales cycle just wouldn't change. And so I started trying to explain, I think it's something different and I want to study it. And the response I got back was, um, that's great. It probably is something psychological, but you can't, we can't develop a product around
Mm,
emotion. Like if it was they were afraid of interest rate risk, we could
sure.
come up with, annuities or other thing. If they were afraid about market risk, we could come up with a structured product. But that's great you go down this road, but there's nothing we can do from a structure standpoint to
Sure.
create something that we can sell. And I thought that was a little bit short sighted. And I said, well, this is what I want to do. I want to go back and study it. Can you be accommodating to the extent that you can be accommodating and give me study hours and things like that? And they say, you
Okay.
sure, well, go ahead as long as you keep doing your day job well. But they really didn't embrace it. They really didn't embrace it. They just kind of thought, I was off on this mad thing.
Mm,
And I was getting a little bit criticized for it because it's like, you have a perfectly good career as an advisor. Why are you taking this risk? And I'm like, I think I'm on to something. And so all of that just started a journey for me to understand that what were the social emotional things that people were going into, were feeling, in addition to the financial things that were necessary for a person to make a 21st century retirement transition, which is much different than the 20th century retirement transition. And it would be somewhat on me to get my my firm to understand, as well as others to understand, that there was a huge difference.
interesting. And I can't
Yeah.
wait to delve into that. But it's a really interesting story of where the book came from ultimately,
Mhm.
right? So,
Yes.
back in 2008, you were You still look like a relatively young individual. I'm sure you were quite young. What really piqued your interest? Did you always have an interest in the psychological and the non-financial aspects of things, or where did it stem from, do you think, Greg?
You know, the fun thing about my research is I'm writing and understanding about the person I'm becoming at the same time.
Okay,
So
yeah,
that
yeah,
became interesting. Is
yeah,
more like every time I study, I'm learning about something that is eventually going to impact me.
absolutely.
So that was a big driver. And
Mm,
then I really felt that the industry had it wrong. I think of one commercial that I was watching that came on a lot by a very well known in our name in our industry, and it was like, what is your retirement number? And so it had people
yes,
walking down the street, and this financial number popped up, whether it was 3 million or 1
sure.
million or 500,000, and it suggested that once the person hit that number, they were going to exit. And so I had which was what I was believing when people were coming
Yeah.
in my office. And so I think the fun part of this is I feel it's new. The second part of it is, as I looked at the global statistics, this is a global phenomenon, right? This is
Mm,
not unique
mm,
to any one market or whatever. The fact of the matter is, one of the primary drivers of this behavior is that we're living longer, and we're
yeah.
living longer across the globe. So I just kind of felt like it was an opportunity to dive into something that transcends a number of cultures, a number of environments, and is necessary to talk about.
Brilliant. Um, uh, it's such a big area, and I'm sure in your practice, right? So you're now
Mhm.
you're a PhD, right? Do
Yes.
people refer to you as Dr. Gregg Lunceford or not?
Yeah, sometimes,
A little
yes,
bit of that.
it's
Okay.
perfectly, yeah, and that's what happened. So when I said I wanted to study it independently, I was accepted into a PhD program at Case Western Reserve University, and this became my topic of study. So I spent my time at the university doing in-depth research on what is it that a person, because there's lots of research out there on retirement, but it
Mm,
studies it through the lens of someone who has been retired and is really driven by a lot of theory that is aligned with gerontology and aging.
okay. Yeah.
What I was trying to figure out is what are the things that a person or the emotions and the stages that a person goes to as they're entering into the process,
Yes.
not in the process,
Okay.
which meant that there was an opportunity for me to make a contribution because there wasn't
Mm,
a lot of research out there. And to the extent that there was research out there, but it did not address what the social emotional things a person was going through in a global financial crisis. So
yes,
because
which
of the
is
time that
very
I was
different.
doing it, unless we went back to the 1930s, there
Yeah.
was not
Yeah.
uh, modern data points to talk about this stuff or understand it.
And so the I guess the information that you gathered, the tools you developed, the writing that you did, the
Hmm.
structures you put in the book, and the framework ultimately that you outline, do you do you find that you now use that to aid the clients that you're working with now on an ongoing basis as they approach and get to the point of stepping out, as it were, for the next chapter?
Absolutely. I in no way view myself as a psychologist,
Mm,
but there's psychology in the work that we do. As
absolutely.
a matter of fact, at the time, I found it, I had to chuckle a little bit because at the time that I started my research journey, um, I was getting blowback from some people going, "Why are you doing this? Why is this so important to me?" But now I don't know about how it is in Ireland, but in the United States, psychology is now 11% of the CFP exam. So
Right.
the industry has now recognized that there is a psychology, and people make financial decisions based on what their past experiences have
Mm,
been with money, and the it doesn't matter. We usually think it's like maybe it's just people who come from money. Maybe they have these have anxiety around it because they don't want people to be attracted to them, maybe because they have financial wherewithal, so they're trying to figure out who their friends are. But it doesn't matter where you come from in life. There could be financial anxiety around money simply
sure.
because you grew up in scarcity, and so
Mm,
poverty scares you, and so there was always a fight in your house about how do we pay the bills and things like that. So what you'll see play out is people who, once they get a little bit of money, they don't want to talk about money, and it's not a lot of money, just enough to, that you can do all right in life. They don't want to talk about developing disciplines and savings and things like that because they witness fights about that so much
Sure.
growing up.
Yeah. Okay.
So what I find is from my research, and also I'm the type of researcher that when I hear someone have a conversation and say this is bothering me, then I go back and research and I write about
Sure.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is really interesting to me as I study people and this phenomena, that it impacts everyone, regardless of if you grew up with a great amount of means or if you grew up in scarcity. This is a challenge.
Mm. And when people think about retirement, and again,
Mhm.
as you said, depends on their lens and their experience and
Mhm.
their life lessons ultimately, and the values that they have. But one of the challenges a lot of people probably underestimate, in my view, and I've heard you speak about this before, is the psychological shift. The
Mhm.
emotional challenges when leaving your job, as it
Right.
were, and all of a sudden not having that job. Like, what are the things that people can do to make that an easier transition, as you say?
Yeah. So I think, and what I've learned is, a lot of people think of work as only having one value. And I think when we start our careers, that is true, right? And that is the economic value.
Hmm.
Going to work is this economic change that we create to get money to do the things that we want in life, provide for our family, send our kids to school, have vacations, so on and so forth. I think when you start getting to the end stages of a career, you start to recognize that work has more purpose and meaning than just economic value. One, work allows you to have psychological successes. So even though some people complain about their job,
Mm.
there is a part of work that allows you to accomplish things every day that make you feel positive about yourself. And who does not like when they accomplish or finish a big project at work, or whoever they are, if they're recognized as the employee of the month? That gives you feelings of self-esteem and value, right? And so
Sure.
all of a sudden, when that is gone, right, where else
Mm.
do you get that? The other part of it is socialization comes through work. And even if you think that you work with colleagues that are silly or whatever, it still gives you something to laugh about, right? So some people are like myself are fortunate to have wonderful colleagues, and I enjoy their interactions. And I've worked in environments where you like really don't like the person down the hall, but everybody
Mm.
gets together and has a conversation about the person about the hall down the hall, and has a laugh or two when you get home from work every day. So there is value to having socialization from work. And a lot of people struggle when they leave the workforces
Mm.
because where do I get socialization from? If anything, that's the
Okay.
hardest piece. And then there's a fourth thing that work provides that a lot of people don't recognize, and that is structuring time. And I think
Mm.
that's where a lot of people have psychological challenges is what do I do with myself all day? When you're working, there is a clear cut set of responsibilities given to you as to where you're supposed to be during the day. We show up at 8 o'clock, we leave at noon, we get a certain amount of time for lunch or whatever. And although it may seem like um, people would be frustrated with that regiment, I think
Mm.
people recognize the value of structuring time when they have free time and can't figure out what they
Yes.
want to do with it.
And that's really, I love those four aspects. So the financial, the reward slash acknowledgement,
Mhm.
that recognition, as it were, the social interaction piece, and then the time and structure piece. So those four headings, and particularly the last. I'm a big fan of rugby,
Mhm.
and I read a lot of biographies and sport biographies I'm really interested in. And one of the biggest things that I hear and read about when professionals, athletes, and sports people leave is, my God, every day was planned out for me
That's right.
before I left, and now I'm sitting around the place, right? Ultimately, or that was the journey they went on,
Right.
right? So, um, those four headings. Um, in the context of the last three, so the acknowledgement, the social, and the time and structure, what are the things that people can do to prepare themselves for that, in your view, Greg, in your
So
research?
I'm glad you mentioned professional athletes. So when I started my research journey, what what is the one thing, a few things that differentiate a 20th century retirement the way we saw our parents and grandparents do it? Maybe
Okay.
some of our parents are doing 21st century retirements.
Mm,
I know in the States, one of the big things is we used to have more traditional pension plans. That safety net has
yes.
gone away.
Same
So
here. Yeah.
there's now more economic uncertainty
Yeah.
for a retiree. But the big thing also is the fact that globally we're all living longer.
Mm,
Okay. And so what I started my research when I started trying to understand what are some of the patterns that you would see, it's not like you have a pool of 65-year-olds that got this life bonus and now
mm,
live 20 years longer to look at. So I said to myself, because we work with high net worth individuals, where would I find a cohort of people that have the financial wherewithal to be retired, but have a long time frame in front of them in terms of their personal longevity, that I could look at the behaviors. And it was professional athletes. You're
okay.
out of the game in your 30s and you actually have 30 years ahead of you. And that cohort looks a lot like today's retiree that leaves in their 60s and can
Interesting.
easily live another 30, 40 years, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
And so, what I started to notice in my research is that some of the dysfunctional behaviors that we demonize athletes for having. So,
Mm,
all of a sudden, you're out of the game and now you're in a bar fight or whatever.
yeah.
You're starting to see play out on the smaller scales with people who feel displaced. And what it came down to was your identity is tied to your work, whether you recognize it or not, especially if
Mm,
you've been doing something for a long period of time. So this professional athlete has been kicking a ball, throwing a ball, whatever, hitting a ball since age 5, being told this is what you do, and all of a sudden, twinkle of an eye, that's over with, right? And
mm,
so they go through this struggle of who am I, what am I, why am I there? The same is true for all of us that work. Even if you think you have the number one seat in the organization or you have the lowest seat in the organization, people, you still have an identity associated to what you do. And so I look at my father. My father was a doorman. I write about him in the
okay.
book. And when I went to college, I went to school maybe 6 blocks away from where his job was. So when I would have breaks during school, I would come over and visit him. Now, my dad believed that whatever you do, you become the best at it. And even though he said go to college and you should never be a doorman, I want you to aspire to do it. He figured out that the way he treated his work, regardless of what the assignment was, is the way to be great. And so what I noticed was my father, who worked for a very prestigious hotel, he worked for the Drake in Chicago, because he was so good at what he did, he had this social network in the community, this very affluent community, as well as this social capital that everybody knew who he was. And it
Mm,
was, if I went on a scholarship interview, and this has happened to me and my brother, and they say, "Well, what's your dad do?" And I said, "Oh, you wouldn't. He's no, he's a doorman at the Drake or whatever." And they go, "You're talking about Phil? I know your dad." Because all of these executives and these people that who
yeah.
stayed at the Drake or went there for lunch or whatever, he stood out among his peers, and so it was to the point where a Chicago newspaper named him as one of the most adorable doormen in Chicago. I think that was around 1987.
Brilliant.
Whenever they used the hotel to shoot movies that were done by MGM or whatever, and they said we need a doorman. My father was in several movies.
Cool.
My father was in whenever there were newspaper ads advertising luggage, the old Samsonite or whatever. My father would be the doorman holding the
Brilliant.
luggage, and so he figured out that he could create this work identity that even though he did not have a very prestigious role, he could create all of this capital through his work that he would
Mm,
get demand the respect of any other employee in the organization. And so I know I'm giving you a long winded answer, But what people have to recognize is how much of their identity goes into their work, regardless of how glamorous that job may seem. If you're really serious about your work, you become known for it. And then the day you walk out of the door, there's this big "Who am I?"
Mm.
You know, am I still Doctor So and So when I walk out the door, even though I'm not doing surgery every day, or I'm not? And so this break in identity is what really causes a lot of anxiety. And this is what triggers this behavior, because you're trying to figure out for the first time in a
Mm.
long time, what's my next step?
And what is the advised or proven next steps to take? Whether I'm guessing it's in advance of,
It absolutely
the
is.
exit from work, right?
That's exactly right. So in advance of, just like you're preparing financially, in advance of, you're saving, you're going through
Yeah.
with your financial advisor, looking at what your cash flow capability is and all of that. The same thing you have to do to prepare socially, emotionally. In advance of that, what you have to do is prepare a retirement vision. And
Mm.
when a person, and if you are, yeah, you're married or have a partner or anything like that, it's very important that that be a shared vision, that you're on the same page. But what you have to do is figure out what it is you want to do. And the problem is that society has set a number of defaults in front of us, and a lot of people start to realize, well, if I got 20 more years of life, those defaults aren't interesting to me. So in the past, you left when you were 65, at
Mm.
least in the States here. And if your longevity was about 75, you had 5 good years to check off what is called a bucket list. And
Yeah.
then probably the ailment started in your 70s that eventually took you out in your mid 70s. Some people had more longevity, some people
Mm.
had less. And so now, if I got a bucket list, how many rounds of golf can I play in 20 years? That's not interesting to me.
Yeah. Okay.
How many, we're supposed to volunteer, we're supposed to take life of leisure, things like that.
Mm.
That's not interesting to everyone. It is still interesting to a lot of people, but that's where a lot of people struggle. So, what is it that you can do to fulfill that replaces that psychological success, that structure of time you got during your day? And so there are a number of things that we have conversations with clients about is, do you think you want to, just because you're in your 60s doesn't mean you have to leave the workforce. Do you want to work longer? It's perfectly okay. I know societal
Mm.
norms tell you it's not, and we still have countries that have mandatory retirement ages, right? But
Sure.
you don't have to do that. There are
Yeah.
maybe you convert a hobby to a small business. Maybe you volunteer time. Maybe you do something that is very unorthodox, but is important to you. And so that's where we spend a lot of time helping people figure out, not only are they financially ready, but
Mhm.
psychologically, how can they maintain the identity?
Brilliant. And that is huge, huge part of it by the sounds of it and all the research that I've read and the people we've spoken to. You speak about a phased retirement, right? Which I love
Hmm.
the concept. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what that could potentially look like for some people?
Sure. So we actually retire twice. Okay, and,
Right.
and this is true. That they say this in sports as well. Now, some people do it simultaneously and they don't realize it happens twice, and some people don't do it takes uh, time to work through it. But you retire twice. The first retirement is when you physically exit your place of work. Okay.
Okay.
The second retirement is when you psychologically let go of the
Mm.
identity you have from work. You're ready to, and for some people, I call them door dashers in my book. When that day comes, they have the retirement party, they walk out, they're not thinking about it anymore, they don't care
No.
about it, they're on to that next thing that makes them feel fulfilled. For other people, you physically walk out of the door, but psychologically, you're just trying to figure out what the next thing is.
Mm.
You're unfulfilled. And so, where we like to focus on is what makes you feel good. And so there were some findings I had when I was doing research that were very shocking to me. One, the word retirement has a negative connotation to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
It has a negative. And so when I was working with my publisher, the word retirement is not in my title.
Mm.
It's exit from work. And the thought is, when retirement systems were created, it was really this negotiation between management and labor. And what they were trying to do is incent people who were older to
Get
just
out.
leave, because we were on an assembly line, and if I can't put the widgets on the line fast enough, right, then you want a
It costs
younger
money.
worker.
Yeah.
So right, so there was this negative connotation to what happened to you. There was this devaluation of wisdom and experience in exchange of who could just swing the hammer fast enough on the railroad line to
Mm.
lay more track every day. And so there is just this negative feeling when you say experience that a lot of people go through when you say, when are you going to retire? We mean it as, we want to celebrate the 40 years or 30 years that you have committed to this, and we want to celebrate your accomplishments. A lot of people don't receive that comment that way. They receive it as, you're calling me old and you're trying to push me out.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
The second one is, a lot of people don't envy their friends in retirement. And I was shocked to find this one out. And what
Okay.
do I mean by that? Well, they look at their friends in retirement, they envy their time. They envy their
Mm.
free time because, I'm working a 40 to 60 hour week, and I don't want to work 40 to 60 hours. So I envy my friend who can get up and do things from there. But they view it as people are doing things to fill their day. They're not doing things that are
Okay.
fulfilling. And I think that's the big one. You
Interesting.
have to figure out what is fulfilling to you. So they say, my friends go play bowling, go to the bowling alley every day in the bowling league, or they go and they play chess in the park. To me, that's just stuff that's filling your day. So I think back to one of when I was working on my doctorate, one of the professors that was on my dissertation committee, and he was saying that his father-in-law was displaced when he left work, and so to every day, what he would do is he would go to different grocery stores and look up. He had the set list of items, so maybe he had 10 items, and he would just go comparison shop to see what store had the the best deal on
Sure.
corn, and it
Yeah.
was just because he had nothing to do every day.
Yeah.
And so, so that's an example of someone who is filling their time, but they're not doing
Mm.
things that are fulfilling with their time. And that's why I say setting that vision before
Yeah.
you exit, so you're going in, you're retiring to something, not retiring from something, is very important.
That's huge. Retiring to something, moving on to something new, as opposed to closing the door.
Right,
It's the optimistic, glass half full view of it. And I think that's
right,
really really interesting what you say about how their friends maybe don't envy a lot about the fact that
hmm,
such and such is Greg is retired now, right? It's like, oh,
right,
it's nearly poor Greg. He'll be so bored now. God love him.
exactly,
It is. It's so if we pick up on that, if Greg picks up uh, on that perception, then that will shape Greg's desire to actually retire. I would think. Well, it's like, no, I'm not going to retire because how will people view me?
right. And so what I learned in this process is that I think there is a willingness between industry and employees to work this out. However, from a policy standpoint, no company is going to go to an employee and say, when are you going to retire and run the risk of being sued for age discrimination, right?
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
and most employees don't feel confident enough to come to their employer and say, you know what, I really would like to talk about how we restructure my work so it's a win-win,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But what I found was the most productive people in retirement were people who had a relationship with their organization where they were comfortable having that discussion,
Mm,
because and a lot of people were afraid to have that discussion because now I seem disloyal, now I don't seem as committed, and the next time we have a financial cycle, I'm going to be the first to go.
mm.
But what I found was the people who were the happiest were the ones who had the courage to do it. And so I think about one person that I interviewed, and they were the head of HR for their company. So
Okay.
maybe being an HR professional, they had a little bit more confidence than
Yes.
most. And they went to their CEO and they said, "Look, I would like to plot out my my decompression from work. And so here's what I would like to do. I work 5 days a week. I have 70 people who report to me. I would like to one, get rid of all my direct reports and groom my successor. I keep my title, but my role is to groom my successor. And I will work here and I'll do the job, but at least I'm empowering the person that comes
Sure.
behind me." One thing that people at this stage of their career score very high in is something called generativity, and that is the desire to coach and help the next generation. So this gave him a lot of psychological success because,
Mm.
unlike other retirees who were only viewed as valuable because of their physical ability, this allows someone entering into this stage to be respected for and appreciated for their wisdom, right? Which is much different and what
Mm.
a lot of people want, especially as now we're in more of a service economy. And so he said, that's what I want for one. Number two, uh, these are some of the causes that I am very engaged in and are also supported by the company anyway. I want 1 day a week to volunteer at this organization so I can figure out if I want to give more
Mm.
time when I do that. And then the third one is I just want a day off. I want a day off to see how much I enjoy leisure, so I can figure out, and we can prorate my salary, but this allows me to understand: do I want to continue in work? Do I want to have a mix of work and leisure, or do I just want to be done with it altogether? And it turned out to be a wonderful. They did this over 3 years and gradually said one day, like, I'm ready to pull the trigger, and it worked
Brilliant.
beautifully.
Brilliant. And I would mirror that. And again, it's quite anecdotal, but I've worked with several people. Most people we work with are at the point of retirement or they're already retired. And I've worked with several people who, over the last few years, have had similar conversations, have had the courage, and it's not always possible, of course, depending on the work environment and what's
Hmm.
happening, etc. But where it is possible, it still takes a bit of bravery and courage, as you say, to have those conversations and to be upfront. And what it has enabled the people that I'm referring to do is have a lovely glide path to
Absolutely.
the exit ultimately, right? That has given them the
Absolutely.
opportunity to test out different things and still get financially prepared, but to test out those other, those social connections, the time and structure pieces.
Now, one of the things that I think has been helpful in recent years in terms of structuring work is that we now live in a gig economy. And
Okay.
so that's why I think where business models such as Uber
Yes.
and Lyft or Airbnb have been very helpful, where you can just say, I can turn work on and off.
Yes.
Right. And so
Mm,
um, I think those are good structures. Emulating that model across other industries, I think, will
yeah.
be helpful in getting people to make this transition that just aren't ready to be door dashers.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I saw a Wall Street Journal article yesterday. The CEO of Airbnb wants to Airbnb everything going forward. He
Mhm.
has plans to Airbnb all services. So that'll be very interesting to see how gigified the economy does
Right.
actually become over the next decade.
And I think there's some companies that have been a little bit more thoughtful about this. So there are some companies that have returnships. And so if you
Okay.
think about the movie The Intern with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, where he
Mm,
came back as a 70-year-old intern, that is real at a lot of organizations.
okay.
And those individuals are able to come back in, and because that type of individual scores high in general activity, it is very helpful to creating a multi-generational workforce, and the amount of product innovation that comes from that
Mm,
is exceptional. So I think Eli Lilly is an example of that.
okay.
They bring back a number of their researchers and scientists out of retirement, and they just sit in an innovation lab and think of
Brilliant.
things to do that have been very helpful in business. And so um, I think those types of models will lead to a lot of value for not only individuals but also organizations. But
Super.
somebody
Yeah.
has to be brave enough to have the conversation.
Well, there you go. That's the big piece. In terms of purpose, that's we can talk about creating a vision for the future, and we can talk about having relationships and social connection. That piece around purpose, in your experience and in your research, does it to generate a new purpose in the future, post exit,
Hmm.
does it require a specific project or role, or what is it? How do people go about creating the purpose post their exit?
It's going to be unique to each individual,
Mm,
but the most important thing is it has to be intentional, right? I
okay.
mean, this you really have to work at this. Is so a lot of time people come up with things. It's like, oh, that sounds interesting. And I was like, no,
Mm,
you really need to. It's sort of like if you were starting a business and you got to write out a detailed business plan. I think you have to be very intentional about what it is what you want to do. The other thing is, I think in some academic spaces they are doing things to help with some of this. More uh, more seen in Europe and Australia than it is in the United States, but there are a number of universities that have developed third age. And so what the third age is it used to be you went from middle age to old age.
mm,
There's this recognition because people are living longer that you now go from middle age to this undefined period called the third age, and then you go into old age. And
okay.
so a lot of universities are developing third age programs where they are creating activities that people who want to stay stimulated and involved
Mm,
come in, and maybe they take a seminar course one day a week and they hear a great lecturer or something like that, or they go in an innovation lab and try to figure out how to start a business, whatever it may be. I think you have to be more intentional of trying to find those types of exercises to figure out what it is you ultimately want to do or for how long you want to do it.
the alternative, ultimately, is it fair to say, Greg, the alternative is you just go and you have a higher risk of being unstimulated, unhappy, you know.
Which there is research that shows that when you are at that state, there's a 40% greater chance of you developing going into depression,
Okay.
right? And so, um, looking at places around the world that have the most centenarians, the people who live over 100, when you look at villages like in Italy and things like that, where
Mm,
those numbers are very high, there are two things that are very important factors there. One is, their diet, and most of them have a Mediterranean diet, so on and
sure.
so forth. The other piece of that is everyone works every day. Now, if
Mm,
you are 90 or 100, your type of work is really more of you sharing your wisdom or whatever versus you picking olives in the garden the way
mm,
a 30-year-old might.
yes.
But there is a contribution that you make to your community every day that gives
Yeah.
you
Okay.
meaning, purpose, and causes you to thrive.
Interesting. So pursue those opportunities. Try and figure out what those opportunities are for
Figure
you,
out what
right?
those opportunities are and the things that are meaningful to you. And I think in that old 20th century model, we told everybody, "Oh, just volunteer." Well,
Mm,
there are a number of places I can go and fill my time as a volunteer, but that doesn't mean that as a cause or that I'm committed to, that I feel passionate about,
yes.
right? And so, like I said, you're doing this individual plan for yourself and asking yourself a lot of hard questions and
Sure.
seeing what you want to commit yourself to, and being very intentional on how you structure this, and structuring something that it's okay that you let go of commitment as you get older, because maybe it's not your leisure time becomes more important to you eventually.
Absolutely. Something that gives you room, if you want it. Absolutely. So, Greg, you're a wealth advisor. You're a managing director there at Messero. What's the world of financial planning and investment management like over there at the moment, out of interest?
Oh, well, it's interesting times as we see globally
Yes.
across the board.
Mm,
But I think, and what I had one person tell me this maybe 15 years ago. So that would have been the time around the mortgage crisis.
Yes.
And she came in. We had run Monte Carlo scenarios several times. This was our fourth trip, and she was like, "I'll just be honest with you. I don't worry about running out of money. I worry about what to do in retirement."
All right.
you know and so in terms of what we look at in terms of working with our clients is we put together strategies, and we believe in diversification, and we believe in taking a long-term view, and slow and steady wins the race, as one of our
Mm,
competitors uses as a tagline, but I do believe it's
okay.
true. And so just staying consistent, setting a plan that you put in place where you are able to deal with market cycles, and
Mm,
feel comfortable that you understand your cash flow, is the way we work with our clients. Absolutely.
yeah. Awesome. And yeah, I do watch a lot of what goes on in the US. And I'm fascinated by the fact, as of today, right, the 15th of May 25, the S&P 500 for the past 5 years, which brings us to the 15th of May
Hmm.
2020, which of course was right in the middle of what in
Right.
2020. The S&P 500 is up over 100%, right? The last
Right.
12 months, the S&P is up over 10%. Yet, so far this year, we've had so much chaos and
Right.
frenzy. It's really interesting. It just reinforces the that concept of long term. Tune out
Long-term
this
view.
stuff.
And now we can look at that now and take a sigh of relief as we looked over that 5-year
Yes,
period, because we've had tremendous gains, like you talk about. But if you look at the volatility and the things that happened in those periods,
yes,
we were concerned
crazy.
about runaway inflation in
Yeah,
2022 and 2020. There was a pandemic. We didn't know
mm,
there was going to be global shutdown.
exactly.
We had a regional bank crisis here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was 2021. There's been a lot there,
A
right?
lot. Yeah.
And more volatility than prior decades. But if you stick to the fundamentals,
Mm.
um, they tend to work over time.
They tend to work overtime for sure. And I was I was very interested in it. It was with a wry smile, and I saw some of the US advisors that I know, particularly at the start of this year, talking about looking at investment opportunities in the rest of the world, and don't forget about Europe. As an investment
Right.
allocation, as an allocation in your
Yeah.
portfolios. And I thought it was very interesting. But yeah, it certainly is interesting times to be
Well,
in the financial
absolutely.
planning space.
Right. Diversification should be broad, to
Yeah.
include not only diversification among asset classes and industries, but also countries. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I came across research. It's a couple of years ago now. It's probably a bit it's definitely outdated to a degree, but it went. The basic findings were that the majority of U.S. investors invest predominantly in the U.S. I don't know. Is that your experience? Is that what you see, or are people generally more globally diversified in general?
I would like to believe that that is just something that occurred over a decade, simply because interest rates were so low here that there
Sure.
was just more of an interest to go into the domestic equities to get
Mm,
dividend income to replace that. Now that interest rates have normalized over since
yeah. Okay.
2022, I would like to believe that it goes back to those fundamentals you learned in
Yes.
college and being broadly
Okay.
diversified,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
diversified across markets. And when you have a year like this year where most of the growth is coming from international, that would be an
Yeah.
argument to once
Absolutely.
again stick to the fundamentals, right?
Back to fundamentals. Back to
Yeah,
basics.
right.
Brilliant. In terms of your own self, if I can ask you, so I don't know what age you are. I'm trying to gauge it. I think you're relatively young. I'm not sure. I'm 45, right? So I don't
Okay.
know.
I got you by a decade. So how's that?
Okay, there you
Okay.
go. Right, so you're well ahead of me, right? In terms of, uh, interested to get a sense from you. So you're somebody who's potentially, all right,
Mhm,
within 5 to 10 years of, traditional exit from work. Like,
mhm.
what are the things that you do, or conversations that you have, or thinking that you do to help you create your own retirement vision?
Well, the interesting part about this, just because you write in research it doesn't mean that you're any better at it than anyone
Yeah,
else,
no,
right? I
100%.
have to be intentional and think about these things myself. And I think that,
Mm,
like I said, one of the joys about my research is that I'm writing about the person that I'm becoming, and I'm
yeah,
understanding the person that I'm becoming. And so, one of the things that I think is absolutely wonderful is that even though, if you look at from age or stage perspective, that is the period of time, the window that you talk about. I've been able to figure out how to make my work my joy to the point that I don't really think that I'm going to exit out
there
early.
you
I
go.
think I'm going to go for as long as I can
Yeah,
see,
yeah.
simply because I have laid out that roadmap for myself,
Yes.
and with a lot of intention. And I
Yeah.
think that I get the opportunity to meet the most fascinating people every day and develop relationships and friendships with them as clients, as well as I am fortunate to work in an environment where they encourage the things that I want to do in terms of
Brilliant.
changing how we view retirement in our writing and research. So I think that I am writing and researching about the person I want to become, but I'm also using the model that I think is the right model to use for
Mm,
myself. And that is how to find meaning and purpose in multiple ways that
brilliant.
you don't, and do it in a way that you don't have to be forced to let go of it until you're ready.
I love it. I love it. And the more and more I research and read and look and speak to experts like yourself, the more I see if you can make your work um, deeply meaningful to you and enjoyable and
Right.
satisfies all of those four criteria that I think you expertly outlined earlier on, I think you're on a winner and you could potentially, potentially keep doing it for a very, very, very long time.
Absolutely. So my goal is not only just to help not only to help clients financially understand how to hit certain goals, but actually get them to understand what it is that makes them who they are.
Mm,
Because the last thing you want, I mentioned that parallel to professional athletes, right? We go through a lot of money when we have dysfunction in our lives,
okay.
right?
Yeah,
You
right.
can burn up a lot of money trying to figure out what your next step is and
Mm,
who you want to be. And so I think they just go hand in hand. And I really enjoy this work.
well done. Good on you. One question I ask everybody,
Hmm.
Greg, and I'd love to get your input is, aside from your own book, could you recommend a book to our listeners? Any book, it could be fact or fiction, but a book
Okay.
that sticks out for you that maybe you've read a couple of times or that you've read recently and says, "Wow, that was actually very interesting." Fact or fiction? Any book that you would say, "Yeah, this was a good one."
Oh, well, let's see. There have been a number of books I'm gonna go to my app to see, because some of these I haven't read in a little while.
Okay.
Um, but there is an excellent book about family discussion around money.
Okay. Oh, right.
Yeah,
Interesting.
the author is Sarah Newcomb, and I'm trying to remember the title here. Um, Hold on, let me look it up here.
Sarah Newcomb.
Dr. Sarah Newcomb.
Okay. I like it. Family discussions around money.
Yeah.
That could be potentially a valuable
Uh,
read for people.
Yes, but what she basically outlines is a lot of times we don't, just like those money values I was talking to you about
Yeah.
earlier. Uh, we don't talk to our family members about money because we kind of feel like that would, say, especially if you come from money, it would limit
Yes.
their ambition, right? And what I think we're learning is there is such a lack of financial literacy now that we actually do more harm than good. And sometimes it's very important to, it's called, the name of the book is Loaded,
Okay.
Money, Psychology, and How to Get Ahead without leaving your values behind. And
I
so
like
to me,
that.
there's a tremendous value in sharing financial values
Yeah.
with your family. And actually, you do more, in my opinion, to contribute to their financial success by not just telling them, not withholding discussions about money, but talking about money and getting them to understand the sacrifices you made to be where you are and what things are important to you, so they continue that legacy and
Mm,
understand their assignment in that, than letting them just get a windfall of cash and go, oh, I guess it's time to buy a
yes.
Ferrari.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's very, very timely. There's obviously generational wealth transition on the move at
Hmm.
the moment. So yeah, that could be a very interesting read for people. Loaded,
Hmm.
and indeed, as is your own book, Exit from Work, available on Amazon. Is that the primary way that people are accessing your book,
Yes,
Greg?
through Amazon, you can find the book. Absolutely.
Did you do an Audible version or anything like
I
that
did
yet?
not do
No.
an Audible version. The thing, I launched the book during the pandemic, so those resources weren't available, and I do need to go back and utilize
Awesome. Yeah, I think you have a great voice. I think it'd be lovely to listen
those. Thank
to.
you. I appreciate that.
Maybe not quite as good as Matthew McConaughey's voice, which was that was a fantastic audiobook.
All right, all right, all right.
All right, all right, all right. That's class. Turn it on and listen to that. That's fantastic. But certainly, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you and get your insights following your PhD and all your research. So thank you very much indeed for joining us here at Informed Decisions.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your time and the invitation, Patty.
My pleasure.